Recapping the first 5 games of Wild Card Weekend on Fantasy Football Today Express. What's up, everybody? Happy Monday. Adam Azer, Jamie Eisenberg here. Let's talk about the 5 games. We'll just go in order. Texans 32, Chargers 12. First of all, the time of possession in all of these games, pretty much, except for the Eagles game, was crazy. In this game, Houston had the ball for 34 minutes, 25 seconds. Baltimore in their game had the ball for 39 minutes and 33 seconds. Buffalo had the ball for over 41, almost 42 minutes. Philadelphia, Green Bay, time of possession was almost even. And Washington had the ball for 35 minutes. So it was just a strange weekend in that regard. But, Jamie, what's a fantasy takeaway from Houston and the Chargers?
I mean, Justin Herbert melted down. His receivers didn't help him with some drops that led to interceptions. But I think, what did he have? 3 interceptions in the entire season in 2024 and 5 in this game?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Yeah, four in this game.
4 in this game. Absolutely nuts, to see how this offense just completely fell apart, and especially after the way the game started, having a 6-0 lead after the first quarter. Joe Mixon, did not have a good start. He had an amazing finish. And, Nico Collins looked like the superstar receiver we know he's capable of being. You hope when you see 32 points, you get more from CJ Stroud, who just continues to, struggle from a fantasy perspective. But it was a solid game for him, not making too many mistakes and, leading the one drive you referenced, where he had 101 passing yards on the drive. So can he give you some optimism? We just finished talking about some high-end quarterback twos that you'll be drafting with late-round picks. I think CJ Stroud certainly qualifies because I don't think anybody's going to buy into him as a number 1 quarterback, but he could still have that upside like we saw as a rookie. So Herbert, fail. McConkey, awesome. Dobbins, not great. Yeah. And for the Texans, the 2 superstars that sort of were great fantasy assets all season long, or the majority of the season, Nico Collins, Joe Mixon coming through.
Yeah. Okay, let's go to Pittsburgh, Baltimore, 28-14. And Baltimore, they're so good right now. But big takeaways from this one.
I was hoping for more from the pass catchers for Baltimore with Zay Flowers not being there. It was nice that Rashad Bateman scored a touchdown you had brought up. And I was recommending the prop pretty heavily on some of the shows I did last week. Zay Flowers over 3.5 receptions. I'm sorry, Rashad Bateman over 3.5 receptions. You're getting plus money on that. And he didn't get it, but still scored a touchdown. Likely had a decent game. Mark Andrews, not so much. But that's just I think the upside of what the Baltimore offense is. They can just beat you in so many ways. Lamar Jackson looked great. Derrick Henry was amazing. And, we all can't wait to see what happens next week between the Ravens and the Bills. For the Steelers, I had a little bit of a different takeaway than Dave. Pickens, I didn't think was a loser in this game, because he bounced back after some pretty crappy performances and still showed you the flashes of, what the conversation that we had, but, just taking a different approach than what Dave did when he called him one of the losers from the weekend. And I thought Russell Wilson, look, after a bad start, he rebounded and got them back in the game, in the third quarter. And one more score, they would have covered, which was would have been a pretty remarkable feat, just how this game, played itself out. So I think Russell Wilson's back. I think they may move on from both running backs. They're both free agents, Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren. I've been trying to acquire a lot of Jaylen Warren toward the end of the season in Dynasty, just because maybe they bring him back and let Najee walk after, not picking up his 5th-year option. So we'll see what happens with their backfield there. But Pickens, as we discussed, I think still has the potential to be a top 15 caliber fantasy receiver. You just don't have to draft him that way.
Yeah, Pickens, the first 6 games he played with Russell Wilson, starting with that Jets game, he was a top 15 wide receiver per game. He was on pace for 82 catches, 1,380 yards, and 8 touchdowns on 130 targets. He was awesome, and it finally looked like, okay, Russell Wilson, George Pickens, this is what it's supposed to be. And then he missed 3 games with an injury, and then he came back, and the last 2 games of the season were just awful for him. He had a combined 4 catches for 50 yards on 13 targets. But I'm not going to forget that stretch of 6 games with Wilson if they bring the band back. All right, let's go to our next game here, and it was Buffalo and Denver. And Denver strikes first with a long touchdown, 43 yards to Troy Franklin, and then 31 straight points for Buffalo to end the game. Any big fantasy takeaways?
It looked as if, Sean Payton thought the game was over. Hey, we won. No, he didn't. I'm curious to see what they do with the rest of the receiving core in the backfield in Denver. A lot of questions, because you can feel good about Bo Nix, based on what he showed, and he got back to running a little bit in this game and the last couple of games, so he showed you still has that potential. Javonte Williams, Jaleel McLaughlin, they might be replaced. Estime is probably going to be a complimentary back. Cortland Sutton, as we discussed on the full-length episode, very safe number 2 receiver, I think, that you can draft, barring a significant upgrade in the receiving core, after round 5. And then Marvin Mims, I think, could still be a late-round pick based on how he finished the season. This was a disappointing game, but kind of to be expected against this Buffalo defense. I think for the Bills, you saw more confidence if you have James Cook, let's say in Dynasty, or want to draft him in that round 2, round 3 range. He looked good once again. Receptions are going to be an issue for him, but still plenty of promise. Khalil Shakir kind of showed you what he is again, 6 for 61, I think it was, on 6 targets. So a very good high-end number 3 receiver, better in PPR. And then we'll see how the playoffs finish. Can Keon Coleman do a little bit more? Can Dalton Kincaid do a little bit more? Can you get some, more, faith in those guys based on how things could hopefully go this offseason and leading into next year?
All right, we're going to take a break on FFT Express and come back and talk about 2 more games, Packers, Eagles, and Commanders, Bucks after this. We do have a question from the chat from Jaquan. I need Adam's take on MVP after Buffalo and Baltimore both dominating. You know what? Cancel all the votes. Watch the game this weekend and make them vote again. Only on this one game. Just let them decide it on the field. But still on Lamar Jackson. But it's a tremendous race. 2 very.
You got some support with the All-Pro team.
Oh, he made first team.
He was the first team quarterback, and it's, I think, all the same voters.
When you just look at the stats, like they showed the stats side by side, they're not even close. Not even close. That's how good of a season Lamar Jackson's had, because Allen's been insane. But so Jackson every category.
The pushback to that will be Lamar's stats were not as good as Dak Prescott's last year.
Yeah, I don't care.
But I'm just saying, like, if you're just going by numbers.
Is that true?
Dak Prescott had a better statistical season than Lamar Jackson.
Even when you factor in the rushing?
I mean, just, in terms of what he was able to do, touchdowns,
and then,
passing yards.
and people say, yeah, but people say that about Allen last year. They go, oh, well, Josh Allen's stats were better last year. Josh Allen committed so many turnovers last year that he got his coordinator fired, and people forget that.
Could the Ravens make the playoffs without Lamar Jackson?
No, we see it every year. When he
I'm saying this past year with what Derrick Henry.
Oh, with Derrick Henry, I don't think so.
I would agree. I don't think the Bills even have a chance.
I mean, no, I agree with that. Yeah. That's the argument for Allen. Like, definitely the Ravens are a better team. Quarterbacks aside, the Ravens are a better roster. But the Ravens defense was awful first half of the year, and Jackson kept them afloat. I'm not going to argue with you if you think it's Allen.
I mean,
it's great. That's Jackson.
Honestly, I would split the award.
Yeah, that could happen too. Jim Nantz was talking about that. Who was it? Steve McNair and Peyton Manning 20-something years ago that happened. All right, 22-10, Eagles over the Packers. Real quick, any takeaways from this game? What are your thoughts on A.J. Brown slumping to the finish line and then 1 catch on 3 targets in this game?
He's not healthy. I mean, I think that's pretty clear. Missing practice going into the game. That we'll see how much that impacts them, depending on who they end up playing in the divisional round. Does he get through full week of practice? They didn't really need him in this game because you got some, I don't want to say surprising performance. We got a good performance from, Dallas Goedert, especially on the touchdown catch where he stiff-armed everybody, getting into the end zone.
It was awesome.
And, Barkley doing Barkley things. Jalen Hurts did not look great either, but how much that factors into, not having A.J. Brown. So, plus the Packers have a good defense. I think that's kind of been an underplayed story, that their defense really did a great job, So all this Jordan Love, is he still a good fantasy quarterback? I think part of that was because they didn't need him to be so heroic as he was a year ago. So I'm not worried yet about A.J. Brown, even if he has a bad game and they lose. I still think he comes back, all systems go. We're talking about still one of the alpha receiving corps. But if they do lose and he has a bad game, this is now 2 years in a row where he did not play well in the end of the season and into the playoffs, if you recall. And so, hopefully it's not a sign of you got to worry about maybe later in the year. Maybe you want to draft him and trade him through the season.
It may be. All right, and our final game was the best one. Washington 23 and Tampa Bay 20. And McLaurin, this was a pretty good fantasy game, even though there were only 43 points scored. But, we talked a lot about McLaurin on the show. We talked about Baker Mayfield. Do you have any faith in Brian Robinson next season to, we talked about like Ramondre Stevenson at the end of the show. are they just who they are? And is Brian Robinson just who he is and never going to really be a fantasy standout?
He looked so good before the knee injury against Dallas, the first Dallas game. So good, and then he comes back after. Is he going to miss any time? What are they going to do? And he has the big game against Tennessee. And it was your favorite, phrase of the fooled you, because it was a bad game against a bad New Orleans run defense after that. It was a bad game against Dallas again. It was bad just, in the playoffs. You wonder if he's healthy. So I think when we talk about running backs like this, and again, we'll see what this backfield looks like. Do they bring back Austin Eckler, for example? He's a little bit of a trap back. He's a guy that's going to be mostly dependent on scoring touchdowns. He'll give you a couple 100-yard games throughout the course of the season. And occasionally he'll give you a 3 to 4 catch game, but it's just not going to be consistent. So as of now, I would take Ramondre Stevenson over Brian Robinson. They both will be at best like RB 20, 21, 22, going into the flex range, but not very excited about it. And I was excited about Ryan. I mean, the game he got hurt, he was my starter of the week against the Cowboys. He got hurt early in the first quarter, and I just don't know if he ever fully recovered. So we'll see what the offensive line does. But it's, as I mentioned, there'll be a winners and losers, playoff stock watch, and he unfortunately will be on the losers list.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's it for FFT Express. And I want to thank you all for watching and listening. And this is the last time I'm going to tell you, please vote for Fantasy Football Today. Sportspodcastgroup.com. Best fantasy betting and gaming is the category. Vote for Fantasy Football Today. Scroll down a little bit until you see FFT. We'll talk to you tomorrow. We'll talk to you on Wednesday on FFT Express.